and welcome back to another episode of the Chips Podcast. Tyler Malato joined, as always, by Ryan Amick. Ryan, how you doing, my friend?
Doing great. We got NBA basketball returning. Only 70 days since the Lakers were crowned champions of the 2020 bubble. But a quick turnaround. I'm ready for the NBA season. I know you are. I bet the players are as well. Very exciting time. And hopefully it's a little more normal than last year. I mean, everyone's going to be returning to their respective arenas, which is a little nice change of pace from the NBA bubble, but still no fans. As we saw last night when the NBA kickstarted opening night, the Lakers had to have the ring ceremony in front of no one, essentially. So not everything's going to be normal about this season, but nonetheless, we're excited for it, and we're ready to look at each team, specifically in the West. As we went over the East last time, we were talking about the NBA, and we're just look at each team, see what they made over the offseason, see where they stand right now, and I'm excited, and I'm ready to go whenever you are.
Yeah, it's good to have the NBA back. This is a long overdue episode. We meant to do the Western preview a couple days ago, then scheduling conflicts, we did the East. But let's get right into it with the West. And let's start with the reigning champion Los Angeles Lakers. Despite being the defending champs, Ryan, they made a lot of moves. They re-signed Anthony Davis. They extended LeBron James. They re-signed Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Markieff Morris as well. Then they brought in Marc Gasol, Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell, and Wes Matthews. Sure, they also did lose a lot of key pieces from their championship team: Danny Green, Dwight Howard, Avery Bradley, JaVale McGee, and Rajon Rondo. But I'll keep it plain and simple because the Lakers, talent-wise, are very good. But are they the favorites to repeat as champions, and do you think they will?
I do think they are favorites to repeat, and it's because, as you mentioned, they just won the championship 70 days ago. So they're coming off a very brief or recent instance where they were champs of the NBA. They're not too far removed from that. And unlike most championship teams, it's kind of hard to maintain all their players and improve from a championship caliber year. But they've gotten even better, in my estimation, just based on the moves they made this offseason. Sure, they did lose key pieces of last year's championship team, such as Rondo, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, and Danny Green. All those pieces were very important for the Lakers to get to the 2020 NBA championship. But what they got this offseason in a Montrezl Harrell from their rival LA Clippers and Dennis Schroeder, two guys right there who are key pieces of their bench.
First and second in the sixth man of the year.
Those are the two, arguably the two best six men of last year, now both on the Lakers squad. And sure, they lost some of their big men. That was a big part of their identity, was their protecting the paint and the rebounding and whatnot. Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee are big losses there. But as we mentioned, Montrezl Harrell will be a little help with that. And also Marc Gasol, they got from the Raptors. He's a champion with the Raptors from the year prior. Now he's with the Lakers, and he just helps them fill the hole they lost this offseason with their bigs leaving. And I just really like all the pieces they made in the offseason. And also, it's a little bit on the hype train, but Talen Horton-Tucker so far looked great for them in the preseason. And he looks like he could be an actual part of this rotation. A rookie last year, barely played at all. Now, if he starts to get some minutes, maybe even take some minutes in the main rotation from maybe a Kyle Kuzma, who didn't play great, but still got an extension, as you mentioned, this offseason. There's a lot of things to look forward to with the Lakers. I think they got better with the depth they got and making up for the pieces that they lost in the offseason. And honestly, none of that really matters as long as LeBron plays like LeBron and Anthony Davis plays like Anthony Davis for them, because those are the two players who essentially will carry this team to another title like they did last year. Of course, the role players and other pieces of the team are important, but the Lakers addressed that in a positive way. And the Lakers, with those two star players, with the depth they've gotten in this offseason, I like them a lot to repeat this year. And I think a lot of people agree with that as well.
I, as a Lakers fan, Ryan, love what you're saying. And I do agree with you. The Lakers are the odds-on favorites to win. And partially because, like you mentioned, LeBron James and Anthony Davis, the best duo in the NBA by far, in my opinion. Maybe Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving might have something to say for it after last night. But this team, if both of those guys, AD and LeBron, are healthy and they're in the playoffs, there's no team in the NBA that can beat this team in a 7-game series. Maybe they'll get one or two, but there's no team that can beat them in a 7-game series. That's how good LeBron James and Anthony Davis is. But that's my biggest concern. LeBron James specifically. The guy turns 36 in 1 week from today, December 30th. 18 years in the league he's starting. There's a lot of miles on those tires, Ryan, and I can't help but be concerned for something's going to happen. We saw with the groin injury his first year in LA, what kind of impact that had. And frankly, that wasn't a major injury on the grand scheme of things like we're seeing with someone like a Klay Thompson or John Wall has dealt with. But you never know when those injuries could come up. I hope it doesn't happen for LeBron James, given how talented he is. But there is a concern there. And also, I don't think he and AD are going to play as many games. I honestly would not be surprised. Go ahead. Okay.
Sorry, it froze for a second, so I thought you were done talking. I didn't mean to interrupt or anything, but the only thing I was going to add to that is I agree. I mean, it's hard to say that someone going into their 18th season is just going to be the same as they were past 17 seasons, even though LeBron has proven year in and year out he can do that. But let's say he does take a little bit of a dip this year, his 18th season, coming off a 70-day break from a grueling NBA bubble experience, right back at it to more NBA regular season action. He might sit a little more in the regular season. He might need some more time to just digest because he's been in the league so long. He's played so recently in such an important environment. His numbers may not look the same, but I think that's all right for the Lakers because they have Anthony Davis in the midst of his prime, maybe towards the peak of his career right now. So even if LeBron James, the consensus best player in the league for the past almost 2 decades, if he takes a little bit of a step down, sure, that doesn't help the Lakers, but Anthony Davis should respond with a step up as he's just getting better as a player. His rapport with LeBron is getting even stronger, making him an even better player because they're grooming this Lakers team to be ready for championships even beyond LeBron. Of course, he signed the extension till 2023, so he's not going to be there forever. But Anthony Davis, they intend on holding for the majority of his career. They just signed KCP, who they hope to have for a while. Kuzma, they intend to keep him on that contract. He's another young piece who could stay with the Lakers post LeBron. So I think it's really important for the Lakers, on the players on the younger side of this team, like an Anthony Davis, as they keep growing, the Lakers keep growing. Even if LeBron starts to decline, as long as he's his same self in the playoffs, I don't see the Lakers taking a step back in the 2021 season.
Couldn't agree more there. Moving on to the team that probably poses the biggest threat to the Lakers in the Western Conference, although we didn't see it in the Western Conference Finals last year. Last night was a telltale sign that the Los Angeles Clippers might be a thorn in the Lakers' side this year. Adding Serge Ibaka, Nicholas Batum, Luke Kennard, they re-signed Marcus Morris. They extended Paul George. Obviously, they got the looming Kawhi Leonard free agency at the end of this season, but they did lose some key pieces as well. Montrezl Harrell, as we just mentioned, Landry Shamet got shipped off to Brooklyn. JaMychal Green was a valuable role player. Ryan, the Clippers can go one or two. They also have a new coach, mind you, in Tyronn Lue. There's a lot of talks with this team that they could be really good or just really slip off. What are you expecting for this Clippers squad?
Well, it's key for them to not slip off because, as you mentioned, Kawhi Leonard is not under contract past this year. So what the Clippers have to aim this entire year towards is making sure Kawhi is happy and wants to sign long-term because they already got one half of the deal in Paul George staying. It made sense because they gave up a haul and a half to get him. They had to make sure that despite how he played last year, if he plays good this year, he's got to stay for the long term in this team. So they made sure to get him to a contract extension. But the big key is that Kawhi has not agreed to one just yet. A lot of the noise has been that he's going to opt out to get a bigger contract once the year is over. But there's no guarantee he's going to opt out and stay with the Clippers for a bigger contract. And of course, the Clippers sacrifice their entire future for a championship right now. So if Kawhi ends up leaving, that's obviously going to be a disaster for the Clippers. But as we saw last night, they played very well together. They looked like they might be connecting a little bit more. Tyronn Lue is a good change of pace at head coach because there's a clear disruption between Doc Rivers and Paul George, which is part of the reason they got him out of town. Even though he has been a great coach for them, he was not getting along with Paul George or some of the other players on this team. We saw Montrezl Harrell wasn't happy with his role on the team, which is why he left for the Lakers in the offseason. There was a lot of issues, which is why the Clippers fell 3-1 in the bubble, and they addressed some of them in free agency. They lost some pieces, as you mentioned, but you got Serge Ibaka to kind of help in the starting role, a seasoned veteran looking for a chip with the Clippers. Luke Kennard, who they lost Landry Shamet, but I think they got a pretty good replacement in Luke Kennard, who's a good scorer, a good shooter, and is a guy they extended as well. They want him to be part of their long-term future. And even guys like Nick Batum, who haven't played well the past couple of years, but last night he was a pretty big player for the Clippers in their win over the Lakers. He could be someone going forward, especially come playoff time, a veteran like him 3-and-D type of guy that helps put the Clippers over the top, because this is still a team with a dynamic duo on Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Sure, they might not be on the same level as LeBron James and Anthony Davis, but they're still one of the best duos in the league. They have great depth. We've seen Ty Lue coach before and help win a chip with the Cavaliers. Now he's back. Even though with Doc Rivers gone, I think this team could work better with Ty Lue as their head coach. And yeah, this season's very, very important for the Clippers, because not only do they have to do better than they did last year, which is a very disappointing second round exit in the playoffs, there's an expectation for this team to go all the way, as there was for this team last year. And they didn't get much better. They didn't get much worse. But what's important for them is not just the players on their team, it's the chemistry. It's how they play with one another. It's getting over last year's disappointment and focusing on this year and the year ahead of them. And last night was a very promising sign for Clippers fans as they took it to the Lakers, who were riding high into last night's game. So if that's a sign for things to come, it's good. It's good for the Clippers, but really this whole season, they're going to be focusing on that Kawhi extension, because as we saw with Milwaukee, they were going to focus all year on that Giannis extension, but lucky for them, they were able to lock him up before the season starts. Clippers, it's not the same case. They're going to have to be worrying about that all year. So they really have to step up and exceed expectations, or could spell trouble come the offseason.
Yeah, and the thing with the Clippers, they weren't able to re-sign Kawhi Leonard just due to contractual NBA rules, whatever. If they wanted to, they probably would have. Let's be real here. I'm a little concerned about the Clippers, not because of the talent on their roster. I think they're a very talented team. I am just not sure if this Kawhi Leonard, Paul George duo is actually something that could work. I think it can work in spurts. It can win you games, but I don't think they can have playoff success. And not just because of Paul George's terrible playoffs. I think it's just there's something about that duo that isn't right to win in the playoffs. I don't think Paul George is an elite enough player to carry a team like he once was in Indiana. Kawhi Leonard, we saw it in Toronto, but that's because they had the perfect system for him to thrive in. I don't know if Tyronn Lue can necessarily do that. Sure, he's a championship winning coach leading LeBron James, but LeBron James is the top 2 player, if not the top player in NBA history. Kawhi Leonard is not that. I don't even think he's top 20 in my personal opinion. Maybe not even top 30. Let's be real. So that would be my one concern there. Also, there are a lot of rumors of the Clippers trying to play the triangle. Last time a team tried to play the triangle, it was the New York Knicks. And Ryan, how did that go?
Well, I mean, there was no way that was ever going to succeed. And that's just a bad example. Like
I just wanted to rub it in a little
No,
bit.
I agree with you. The last time we tried to see it in the NBA was beyond a failure. But with the Clippers, we'll see. I mean, they just need a change of pace somehow.
Oh, they definitely do.
Yeah, it's whatever works for them. We'll see in the regular season. They could try it out, and if it doesn't work, they'll abandon it by the playoffs. So it's just something new for the Clippers, because they just need a change of pace from last year.
I agree. And then one other concern I have is Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams. There's something about those guys that I'm just not too much of a fan of. I don't like them as players, to be completely honest, but I just don't think they are pieces that will necessarily help for winning. Lou Williams is going to get his buckets, but that's very hit or miss. Patrick Beverley, he's got to be on the court. And after that, then they're kind of low on guards, especially guards that can bring the ball up. So who really knows with the Clippers? I think they're going to drop off a little bit, not so much because of the lack of moves that they made or the pieces that they added, but also because the West did get a lot stronger from top to bottom. Moving on to the team that upset the Clippers in a 3-1 comeback in the playoffs, the team that actually had 2 down 3-1 comebacks in the playoffs. The Denver Nuggets did not necessarily make a lot of big moves. They drafted R.J. Hampton. They brought in JaMychal Green. They also drafted Zeke Nnaji out of Arizona. They did lose some key depth pieces, though. Mason Plumlee, Torrey Craig, and Jeremy Grant, just to name a few. I mean, this team is going to go as far as Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic carry them, and maybe Michael Porter Jr. Ryan, what's your assessment of this Denver Nuggets squad?
Yeah, especially focusing on that third player you just mentioned, Michael Porter Jr. This Nuggets squad is loaded with young talent. Obviously, we saw Jamal Murray take the next step up in the NBA bubble. He's always viewed as a solid scorer and a starter for this team, but he showed he could be one of the leaders on this team. He had some of the best performances in the bubble in general. He really shined in the bubble, and looking forward to see how he builds on that come the regular season. But him and Jokic are obviously a dynamic duo for this team. But Michael Porter Jr., he came alive in the bubble a lot. He's now in his third NBA season. I feel like Coach Malone for the Nuggets does not like to play young players a lot. We saw Michael Porter Jr. didn't get many minutes last year
Also
beyond the
coming off an
bubble,
injury, let's be
and
real.
he was coming off an injury, so they wanted to ease him in. But now he's showing no signs of that injury, which had him drop in the draft, where he was touted to be an easy top 3 pick because he's that type of talent. And when he's healthy, like he showed in the bubble, he could be a huge piece for this Denver Nuggets team. So I think if they start him in starting lineup, play him more minutes, he could be that kind of third piece of this big 3 Nuggets team that could go as far as they did last year. I'm very high on the Denver Nuggets because of their depth. They did lose Jeremy Grant, which I thought was a pretty big loss for them. I thought they would have looked to re-sign him, but they still have Paul Millsap, who's going to plug in at the 4 for the Nuggets. And they have, as we mentioned, JaMychal Green, who they signed in the offseason, who could add depth, replacing guys like Jeremy Grant. But really, with this Nuggets team, looked for their young players to just develop even more. Michael Porter Jr. looked to have an almost 18-point per game season, maybe pushing 20 points per game. Look for Bol, who's still considered a rookie, to get some minutes, backing up Jokic and Paul Millsap at that position. So really, this Nuggets team, they've got veterans who could lead them in the playoffs. They got their star players in Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, and they got really good young players like Michael Porter Jr. and Bol who can help this team just go just as far as they did last year. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find them in the Western Conference Finals again.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that one. And Bol, you mentioned, is someone who I'm actually really looking at. I don't think Denver would have moved on from Mason Plumlee to be the backup to Nikola Jokic if they're not going to give Bol a chance. I think we'll see a lot of Bol, maybe not 20-plus minutes a game, but I think he'll definitely be a solid backup to Nikola Jokic. And who knows, maybe they throw some funky lineups out there with Jokic at the 4 and Bol at the 5. Who knows? And also with the Nuggets last year in the bubble especially, Gary Harris was not 100%. He was coming off an injury. Will Barton, I don't think, played at all in the bubble. The Nuggets, they didn't have a lot of their key pieces and still made an incredible run. Jamal Murray was the main reason for it. Let's be real here, carrying the Nuggets past the Jazz and then making remarkable plays against the Clippers. But I think now that they got this full squad healthy, they got a very solid coach, one of the best coaches in the league in Michael Malone. This Nuggets team could scare a few teams. I don't think they're going to necessarily have the greatest of regular seasons, like once again, because there are so many improved teams in the Western Conference, but they will be a scary playoff matchup. Let's say they get like the 6th seed. I'm not foreshadowing anything for our standings projections later, but let's say for some reason they were like a 6th seed. They would be a lower seed compared to, they play a 3 seed in the first round and then a 2 seed in the second round, most likely. That's a scary opponent to face up against. That's what's so great about the Western Conference this year, is that any team, there's going to be one team lower than what we expect them to be, but they're still going to be a really tough playoff matchup, and Denver could definitely be that. Also, Jamal Murray, he's going to be a first-time All-Star this year. I'm calling it right now.
I definitely wouldn't be surprised. He's one of those young players, as I was mentioning. You can lump him in with Michael Porter Jr. and Bol. I mean, he's still in his mid-20s. Jokic, too, mid to late 20s. I mean, they're just such a young team who's just getting in stride now. We've seen them improve every single year, just going from a near playoff team to making the playoffs to now making noise in the playoffs and getting far into the Western Conference. After the year prior, they got to the divisional round and went to 7 games with the Blazers, almost got to the Western Conference Finals that year. So each year they just make more and more improvements as a team. Look, I really hope, as you said, Bol, you imagine, is going to get more playing time than last year. I think they might take a Michael Porter Jr. approach where he'll play some minutes, but still coming off that injury, he's not going to play the entire year and, is most likely just going to come off the bench the entire year. But that means they might improve this year and then come next year if Bol is fully healthy. Michael Porter Jr. shows he could be an all-star caliber player. Jamal Murray maybe is an all-star at that point, and Jokic is an MVP candidate. By next year, I could see this team as being almost a favorite in the West, given that LeBron will be a year older at that point. We don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs. I mean, there's so much hope for the Nuggets right now. It's not a type of season where if they don't win a championship, it's a disappointment. But instead, if they can just improve internally as a team and show that they're ready to take that step into title contention next year, I think that's huge for the Nuggets, and I think that's what they should look forward to this season.
I agree 110%. Shifting gears now to the number 4 seed from a year ago, a team that's actually been kind of talked about with the Denver Nuggets this offseason, the Houston Rockets. And the reason why is because I don't know if you heard, Ryan, but there's a player named James Harden down in Houston that kind of wants out. And people are saying Denver could be a team involved and Houston will get Michael Porter Jr. amongst other things. First of all, I don't think that move should happen at all. Let's start there. Do you think James Harden will find his way to Denver?
I don't know about Denver, but
Well,
what I
not
do
Denver.
know.
But better question: will Denver be involved in a trade for James Harden, whether it be a 3-team deal or what have you?
If I was the Nuggets GM, I would say no to that because Harden's proving each day that his trade stock's
Each
getting worth
hour,
more.
each hour.
He's we understand that he wants out of Houston, but to hurt his own reputation, to just act the way that he's been acting, it shows that he doesn't really care about winning. He's all about himself. His whole tenure with the Rockets, he's gotten literally everything he wants. And the second he doesn't like things, he just doesn't pay attention to the team. When he comes to practice, he's throwing basketballs at rookies and cursing them out. It sounds like a Jimmy Butler type situation. But with Butler, the reason why he got upset is because he didn't feel the players on the Timberwolves matched his energy in terms of focusing on winning. It's the complete opposite with Harden. He doesn't show any focus on this season, on winning a title. He focuses more on his superstar status, going to clubs, hanging out with celebrities, doing all the other stuff that he should have had during the offseason. But instead, he's carrying that over into the start of the season. There's question on whether he'll even play tonight in the opener for them. It doesn't really matter because he obviously has ruined his rapport with the Rockets. He might even sit out until he gets traded because he just wants out of here. And whatever team trades for Harden, they're obviously going to get a great talent. They're also going to get a great headache in James Harden, who's, as I feel really bad for the Rockets because they did lose Daryl Morey in the offseason. They lost their head coach, Mike D'Antoni, as well. So it's a whole new system for the Rockets. They just made a trade for John Wall, who James Harden had allegedly said he would be interested in playing with. They go and get him, get Westbrook out of there because they obviously weren't going to work together. That only lasted a year. And now Harden just wants out and wants to get traded to the Nets to try to win a ring out there. So there's a lot of things going on with the Rockets. I feel kind of bad for the situation they're in and how much of a headache James Harden has been. So going back to your question, no, if I'm the Nuggets, I don't do that trade if it means giving up Michael Porter Jr. Maybe if they find some other pieces they could give up for Harden, then I think it makes it worth it. But yeah, it's just Harden is ruining his draft stock each and every day. I don't know where this Rockets team's going to go because they could end up just holding James Harden because they have the control here. They have the leverage. He's just ruining his, as I said, his draft stock a lot. So they might just hold him until he kind of builds that back up. So then you have John Wall, James Harden, DeMarcus Cousins playing. That sounds like 5 years ago that could be a championship type of team. But now I'm not so sure about that. The chemistry is going to be a huge issue all year if Harden's still on that team. I can see the Rockets, if they keep all three of those players and they signed guys like Christian Wood in the offseason, Sterling Brown, these type of guys to help build bench on their depth, they could be like the Thunder where some people don't expect them to go to the playoffs, but then they make a playoff push. But if they get rid of James Harden, they might blow it up, go into rebuild mode, and be out of the playoffs. So this Rockets team, I think, is one of the most interesting and uncertain teams in the West.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with James Harden. I personally think the longer he's on the roster, the worse this team will be. I think they need to get him out of there. Sure, Houston said that they were comfortable, they were willing to get uncomfortable. That was the biggest piece of bullshit I ever heard. And I think they should regret saying that. I probably think they are regretting saying that because James Harden's like, okay, challenge accepted, going full Barney Stinson mode and making it as uncomfortable as possible. There was reports of today, like you mentioned, that he might be missing tonight's first game because he was, ironically, at a strip club. He has since denied those claims, but given all the accusations that have come out about James Harden in the last couple of weeks, maybe he probably was. I wouldn't be surprised given that for the entire time in Houston, like you mentioned, no one's been able to say no. The fact that a Houston Rockets staffer was able to openly say that just shows to me, that changes my whole perspective of James Harden. Sure, I thought he was a great player and that he could maybe lead a team with the right pieces around him. Now, I don't think he has any ability to lead a team. And he's kind of turned into the Terrell Owens of the NBA. Every place that Terrell Owens went, there was an issue. And it all stemmed back to T.O. Every time that James Harden brings in a new superstar, whether it be Dwight Howard, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, all those players ended up leaving. And there's one common thread, and it's James Harden. And I think James Harden is now put himself into a corner that I don't think he's going to be able to dig himself out of. He's killed his trade value, like you mentioned. And the Rockets are going to suffer for it. They're going to suffer in terms of their play on the court, new head coach in Steven Silas. That's going to really screw them over. And then the fact that they're not going to be able to get probably the best package they possibly could for James Harden because teams are going to know, hey, this team, the Rockets just want to get James Harden out of here. We could probably undercut him a little bit. I was saying to you before we started recording, James Harden to the Knicks. I would love to make that happen just for the drama's sake. I think James Harden versus the New York media would be awesome. I know for you as a Knicks fan, you'd hate it. And then circling back to the other thing you said, unless you want to elaborate on my Knicks comment.
Well, I do, because honestly, I think I don't want him to go to Knicks, but going to a team like the Knicks honestly suits him better because a lot of the narrative for a while now has been that Russell Westbrook is the type of guy who kind of stat pads, is not a championship winner, and can't get it done in the playoffs and all that. But once they got him with James Harden, I think people realized that what everyone's been calling Westbrook actually applies to Harden instead. Because he's the type of guy who'll put up 30 a night. He'll shoot 12 plus free throws a game. He'll do all these crazy stuff during the regular season. But then once it comes to playoffs, he can't get it done. Then he's shown he's not committed, and as has been proven in this offseason, and just on his play on the court, whether his lack of defense, his just attitude towards the team, and the fact that he can't get with any of the star players he requests to get on his team, and then has them shipped away. So I think that narrative that Westbrook got from the media of being a stat pattern, not a winner, it's kind of shifting to Harden now. So he said he wants to go to a contending team. But if you're a contending team like the Nets, Sixers, Nuggets, whatever, looking or in these trade talks for James Harden, you kind of take a step back because you're looking to win a title. And even though this is a guy who's one of the best scorers in the league, will easily average 30 a game again, most likely if he's focused, it really doesn't matter because if he's not for winning, he doesn't fit the system. He's not going to buy into this new system, especially if he goes to the Nuggets, a team he didn't have on his list. So who knows if he wants to stay beyond his 2 years left on his deal. I mean, there's a lot to look at if you're a contending team looking for James Harden. And instead, maybe a team like the Knicks or a team with not much direction, just looking for a star, looking for something, some player to kind of take over. James Harden's perfect for that because he'll go, if he were to trade to a team like the Knicks, he'd go right in right away, be the star, he'd be the scoring focal point. He'd probably average almost 40 a game with the Knicks because he'd be like main shooter on this team, and that'd be perfect for him because that's essentially what he wants. As long as there's good gentlemen's clubs around, I think James Harden will be happy because that's kind of he's kind of shown that those are his two motives in life: scoring a lot of points and going to a lot of gentlemen's clubs. But either way, James Harden, what he's done these past couple of weeks, it's made it hard for any team to want to trade for him, despite the obvious talent that's there. And you said it brings up T.O. vibes. I also get Antonio Brown type of vibes where the
more recent,
undeniable, but he's just shown his head is not on straight. He's not focused on winning, and he's doing things outside of the game that are hurting his reputation and play on the court. So James Harden is one of the biggest stories of this offseason. It's one of the biggest reasons why the Rockets, for me personally, are so unpredictable. And I'm looking forward to see where he gets traded because I assume the Rockets eventually trade him away or else he'll be an absolute head case for him all year.
I 100% agree with you on that. The Rockets are by far the most unpredictable team, in my opinion, this year. And one more thing on James Harden, because there's another point I want to mention about this Rockets team as a whole. James Harden, I've been saying it for years that he's a stat pattern. And I think it's not even that he's a stat pattern. He's just a bad teammate. We've seen it. We've seen the reports now of him throwing a basketball at a rookie. What kind of a leader does that? I mean, stop it. I mean, James Harden has really, like you said, what we've been saying for the last few minutes now, has really hurt his reputation, hurt his brand. I am surprised that no one in his close group has been like, hey, man, slow your roll a little bit. Like, you are really shooting yourself in the foot here. And I would not be surprised if in a few years, James Harden, if the headaches continue, he's kind of out of the league just because of that, of all of that he's done for himself is just too far to return. There might be something in his beard oil. That's probably what's making him go so crazy. Who knows? But the one thing that sucks about this whole James Harden thing is the fact that the Rockets, they added John Wall. They added DeMarcus Cousins, two guys who have missed significant time due to injury. John Wall has looked really good in the preseason. He says this is the healthiest he's been in 6+ seasons. DeMarcus Cousins, he's looked okay, hasn't looked great, but then again, it's been the preseason, so we'll see once they get into the regular season. And then they also added a Christian Wood, who is one of the top young big men in the league. All that gets overshadowed by this James Harden drama. I honestly just want James Harden to go away and just ignore him because that's what he ultimately deserves. unlike some other people in our society. Take that as you will. And we focus on the Rockets team that's actually going to play most likely in Wall, Cousins, Wood, etc. Because those three guys right there, I'm really eager to watch, regardless if James Harden is on the court or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just looking at the past 2 point guards he's played with, you have Chris Paul, who as soon as he leaves, he brings the Thunder to a surprise playoff run, which we'll get into in a couple seconds here. And Westbrook, well, it's left to see what he'll do with the Wizards, but I assume with him and Bradley Beal, they'll be in contention for a playoff spot, and he'll be doing just fine without James Harden. So it really comes down to James Harden being the actual problem in Houston. So they should look to get rid of that problem with a trade, even if they don't get the return value they would like, which he is a top 5 type, top 10 type of player. You're not going to get someone in that caliber in return. It's kind of like that saying where you trade a 5-star player for 5 1-star players. That might be the case for the Rockets, but in this case, this 5-star player is not worth the 5 stars because he has not been playing or acting like that type of player.
No, I 100% agree. And, honestly, it's sad. It's ultimately sad when you look at it. Moving on to the Thunder that you kind of teased up there. Honestly, there's not much to say with this team because I think you and I had the similar assessment. They're going to stink this year. They brought in Al Horford. They brought in George Hill, Trevor Ariza. They have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but they lost a lot of veteran pieces. Chris Paul, who, like you mentioned, led them to the playoffs, and probably they could have gotten into at least the second round if it wasn't for, surprisingly, a James Harden defensive play. Steven Adams, gone. Dennis Schroeder, gone. Gallinari, gone. Nerlens Noel, Terrence Ferguson, all gone. I mean, the Thunder team, they're stockpiled draft picks. They're set up for the next 10 years in draft picks. And who knows, maybe they package those picks one day for a superstar player. Who knows? But honestly, I think the Thunder are going to stink. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the one bright spot on this team where I am very intrigued to see how he develops because he could be a guy, honestly, in his third season that could be up for most improved player this year if he balls out.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder are out of their backcourt now. He's going to be the main focal point, the kind of the building block this team starts to build around as they are in full rebuild mode. They were a surprising playoff team last year. I think they're unsurprisingly going to be out of the playoff race this year, given all the veterans they traded away and released during this offseason. But one thing we learned from the Thunder team this offseason is that Sam Presti has an unhealthy obsession with first-round draft picks. But it's not a bad thing. I mean, he made 10 trades this offseason, and now, count them, 18 first-round picks through 2027. Just an unreal stat of how well Sam Presti has turned this around. It was not too long ago that this team was full of Westbrook, Paul George, even Carmelo Anthony. Those are only a few years ago.
It's not too long ago that Kevin Durant was on that team.
Yeah, and going back a couple more years, you had Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, even going back to James Harden. I mean, there's so many different players this team has had over the years, and Sam Presti's done a great job of realizing that they're not going to go to the finals with these type of players. So he trades them and turns them into future building blocks. And this team is full future at this point. They made a couple draft picks in this draft in Alexei Pokusevsky and Theo Maledon. They have, as I mentioned, 18 first-round picks in the next 7 years. And they just got a new head coach in Mark Denault, who's a 35-year-old. So this is a very young team from top to bottom, from coaching staff to players. And some of the longest tenured players on this team are, as you mentioned, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Darius Bazley, who have been on the team for literally 2 years. Or I guess Mike Muscala has been the longest tenured Thunder. But either way, this is a brand new team. There's no way set in stone that this is going to be the team even going into next year. They might make even more moves going into next.
Al Horford probably won't be on that team.
Yeah, they'll try to get rid of that contract. He's just eating up contracts so they could get first-round picks for him. But the Thunder are set for the future and beyond, and they're going to suffer through some bad seasons right now. But lucky for them, they've had past seasons where they've had star players bring them to the playoffs. Couldn't get them to a championship, so they're looking to rebuild and start over now. So we'll see in the coming years if the Thunder can hit on these millions of draft picks that they have and make a new unit of players that could bring them to championships from years to come. But yeah, going into the season, Thunder are not going to be a good team, and that's to be expected.
Yeah, and I think the one other thing with Oklahoma City before we move on, you mentioned it. They got to hit on these draft picks. The thing with the Celtics, when they got all those draft picks from Brooklyn and other trades that they made, they weren't able to hit on a lot of those early ones. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, et cetera, et cetera. If the Thunder can do that, then they maybe can take a risk. Take a guy who might not be as highly on the board, like a Giannis Antetokounmpo type player, someone who's not well known internationally, but has a lot of potential. They can have those opportunities, but they have to be able to hit on those picks early. Moving on to the Utah Jazz, a team that blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs. They re-signed Donovan Mitchell. They extended Donovan Mitchell on a supermax. They re-extended Rudy Gobert on a near max contract. I think it's 5 years, 190 million was the number, if I'm not mistaken. They didn't lose a whole lot of pieces. They re-signed Jordan Clarkson as well. They drafted our Syracuse friend, Elijah Hughes, and they brought back Derek Favors. They also will have Bogdan Bogdanovic coming back off injury. Ryan, at least for me, I'm excited for Utah. I think they could be another one of those teams that probably won't be high in the standings, will be a tough playoff series given the talent on their roster. I just don't know if this team could really compete with the top tier of Western Conference team, and which of a tier of the Lakers, the Nuggets, and the Clippers, and maybe one more team who we'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of the teams in the NBA now, especially the successful ones in title contention, are full of superstar duos, as we mentioned with LeBron and AD, Kawhi and Paul George, KD and Kyrie. All these successful top-tier teams have great superstar duos. The Jazz have their own version of that in Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, which is a solid duo nonetheless. They were first-time All-Stars last year. They'll be building on that going to this season. And in the playoffs, they did lose a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets in the first round, but they were a Mike Conley 3 away from actually beating the Nuggets, moving on to the next round, where they could have easily challenged the Clippers or the Lakers, whoever they would have played based on their seeding.
It would have been the Clippers.
It would have been the Clippers. So Who knows? The Clippers could have had a collapse against them, and then the Jazz could have made it to the Western Conference Finals, and we'd be talking about them like we do the Nuggets. So it's easy to say, based on the results of last season, that this team is not on the same level as some of the top teams. But I really like this team, especially this year. I think they're primed to have one of their best seasons. Mike Conley did not have a great start to his Jazz career. Look for him to have a much better year this year, be the primary playmaker on this team, because they have Donovan Mitchell coming off a great bubble performance, putting up multiple 50-point performances, and he was playing with an injury as well, and he was just fighting through to almost get the Jazz to the next round. He's a star in the making. He's a keeper. I'm glad for the Jazz sake that they were able to sign him to a max extension and keep him for the prime of his career. As you mentioned, Bogdanovic coming back from injury is huge. They missed his presence in the bubble, his three-point shooting, his defense on the perimeter, all that good stuff is huge for them. Also talking about perimeter defense, Royce O'Neal in their starting lineup as well is a solid piece there. And all leads to this defensive focal piece at center in Rudy Gobert. Mm-hmm. I'm happy that they were able to re-sign him, but boy, did they give him a lot of money. I mean, they gave him the third most expensive contract in NBA history, and he's arguably not even a top 3 big in the current NBA. So obviously that contract does not match up to his playing style at all. But that being said, you're in Utah. You're not going to get much free agency buzz in most years. So it's important when you draft, especially when you draft a player like this.
Well, they traded for him. Denver drafted
and traded for Donovan Mitchell, both of them. Yeah. Great trades on draft night. It's important for them, players that have been in your system, that you've drafted, that you want to keep because you know free agency is probably not going to do you well. It's important to make sure Rudy Gobert stays. But if I were them, I would have negotiated for a smaller contract, because even if he doesn't play up to his standards, they could have at least traded him on a more reasonable contract. But this is one of those Westbrook, John Wall, Chris Paul type deals, mm-hmm. where if he doesn't play up to even half of the standards he set on his contract, then it could spell disaster for the Jazz, because it'll be very hard to move him, considering he's not a current NBA big in the sense that he doesn't space the floor. He's not a great shooter, doesn't shoot well from the free throw line. That could be a huge problem for the Jazz, because he's kind of like an Andre Drummond type of player. You don't see Drummond getting max extensions like this. So I feel like they overpaid him in that sense. So and this year it'll look good because they'll have Rudy Gobert coming off of 2 Defensive Player of the Years and an All-Star last year. They have Donovan Mitchell, who's just getting better and better. This team is built for this year, but come 2-3 years from now, that Gobert contract might look like a disaster, especially if this Jazz team doesn't get out of the first round, which they haven't done the past 2 seasons. Long term, I'm not too confident with this Jazz team based on those deals they made. But in terms of this season, I think they made the necessary moves to challenge for an NBA championship, because you can't count them out. But if you put them against the likes of the Lakers and the Clippers, it's not very likely that they ended up coming out victorious in a 7-game series with either of those teams.
Yeah, it's going to come down to a good matchup for the Jazz to really make some noise. What's funny about the Rudy Gobert deal was that he was offered the max. The Jazz wanted to give him the full max. I think it was 5 years, 220 million or something like that, somewhere around that number. I could be completely off on that, but I knew it was a lot higher than what he was actually received. And Gobert was like, no, I don't want the max because I want us as a team to have flexibility in terms of cap space to sign guys in the future. So I think from that standpoint, Rudy Gobert is all in on this Jazz team, which is great because given how things ended in the world of sports and the shutdown, Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, that whole fiasco back on March 11th of this year, it's good to see that those two guys are able to put their differences aside, come together on the court. I think they are a great duo. They really complement each other's game well. And I'm excited to see what Utah does, but it's going to come down to matchups, in my opinion. Moving on to one of the most exciting young player in the NBA, in my opinion, Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavs did not make a whole lot of moves. They traded away Steph Curry and they brought in Josh Richardson. That's pretty much it. Unless I'm missing something totally crazy here, Ryan. But for the Mavericks, it's going to be how far Luka can take them. It's going to be Luka or bust, basically.
Yeah, as you mentioned, they didn't make many moves in the offseason. They did draft some players who I think could have somewhat of an impact off the bench for them. Looking at Josh Green and Tyrell Terry, especially Tyrell Terry, an absolute sniper, one of the best shooters in the draft. And he's just one of the many shooters on this team. They did lose Seth Curry, as you mentioned, but they got Josh Richardson, who can shoot, can play defense, can rebound. He's got good hustle, better size than a Seth Curry. So I like that move for them. They re-signed Tim Hardaway Jr. to an extension, so he's going to be around long term. He's another secondary scorer for this team to Luka's primary scoring, who Luka Doncic can easily win MVP this year. A lot of people think he's going to win MVP just based on his progression from rookie year, being the clear rookie of the year in that class, despite being in a class with Trae Young and that being somewhat of a debate. It was always clear that Luka was going to be the best player in that draft class. Then going to last year, makes his first All-Star game, gets the Mavericks to the playoffs, and then to the bubble where he played a solid series against the Clippers, had that great buzzer-beating shot that everyone's going to go back to. His development each time we've seen him is unreal, and he's looked like from his small stint in the bubble, he looks like he's ready to make that step to an MVP type of player. He puts up triple doubles almost every night. He's one of the more efficient shooters and scorers on this team. I think the Mavericks will be a top tier playoff team just because of Luka Doncic. Kristaps Porzingis' help has a lot to do with their success as well. When he's healthy, he's one of the better bigs in the league just because how unstoppable he is for a 7'3" guy to be playmaking and ball handling and shooting the way that he does, not to mention the rim protection that he provides as an obvious 7'3" guy. His presence is huge for this Mavericks team, especially if they want to go far in the playoffs. So his health will be a big factor on how successful this team is. But nonetheless, whether they have him for the most of the year or not, Luka Doncic will carry this team. He will be one of the easy MVP candidates for this season. And he's going to be one of the more exciting teams to watch, the Mavericks are.
I concur with that thought by you. I think the thing with Luka is I don't think they're going to be a top tier playoff team. I think Luka is extremely talented, but I just don't know if they have the pieces around him necessarily to really succeed. I think they need to, if Kristaps Porzingis doesn't play at the level that we expect him to after this year, I think they should look to move on from him. I know you are a Kristaps Porzingis stan, given the fact that he played for your Knicks and was a lone bright spot for a few years there, but I don't think Luka Doncic can do it all necessarily by himself. I think he needs to have a co-star with him. Who that would be, I really don't know, but I think they need to move on from Kristaps Porzingis. But I am excited to see the Mavericks, another team who probably won't be a top 4 seed, but will be a tough playoff team. If they're the 7th or 8th seed, I'd look out. And also, Luka Doncic in the bubble, had he not hurt his ankle and the Clippers deliberately trying to knock him out of the game, basically, like Marcus Morris and Patrick Beverley stepping on his ankle, basically, I think the Mavericks could have upset the Clippers in the first round. They were that good. They went to 6 games, so who knows what that series could have gone down. Final team from the playoff picture from a year ago, the Portland Trailblazers. They got your boy, Dame Lillard, CJ McCollum as well. They made a lot of moves in the offseason, re-signing Carmelo Anthony, like that, Rodney Hood, Derek Jones Jr., Harry Giles, bringing back Enes Kanter, and then the big trade for Robert Covington. They lose Hassan Whiteside, who is, I guess, a solid presence in the middle. I wouldn't say that with much regard. Yusuf Nurkic, he'll have now a full season, full 72 games if he plays all of them, coming back after his injury. Remember, he came back right before the bubble. So the fact that they'll have their whole squad back, I'm really excited about this Portland Trailblazers team, and I think they could compete for a top 3 spot in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I'm just excited as you are, even more excited because the star player on this team happens to be my favorite player in Damian Lillard, who, along with Luka Doncic, I think will be one of the front runners for MVP this year, just based on the performance he had last year, especially in the bubble. He's looking like one of the more unguardable guards in this league, just based on his range, just something we've only seen from a handful of players. You mentioned maybe Steph Curry. Trae Young looks like he could be in that caliber soon. But Damian Lillard has shown that his consistency from 35 plus feet out is one of the most unguardable things in the league. And it's why the Blazers were one of the more feared 8 seeds, not only last year, but in recent memory. I mean, they didn't win a game against the Lakers.
They won game 1.
Lillard, or they did win a game, against the Lakers. But then Lillard got injured, and then Anthony Davis and LeBron James aren't going to lose many games to anybody. So they took care of the Blazers in the first round. But nonetheless, this Blazers team, had they been any other seed, could have easily made noise in the playoffs. Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, still one of the better backcourts in the league. They made great offseason moves on the wing. Their wing depth is crazy now. As you mentioned, Derek Jones Jr., Robert Covington were additions. They re-signed both Carmelo Anthony and Rodney Hood. So they have wing depth on the bench as well. Nurkic finally back healthy. If you're looking for a big 3 on this team, it's definitely Lillard, McCollum, and Nurkic. And those 3 play so well together. Nurkic's pick and roll game with both Lillard and McCollum is one of the more harder things to stop in the league. And offensively, this team is going to have no issues at all. You look at their starting lineup, almost everyone's capable of scoring. Melo and Hood off the bench can score as well. Gary Trent had a great NBA bubble performance shooting from 3. If he can keep that up, he's going to be a great part of this team as well. Anthony Simons, another young guy who could score as well. There's no shortage of scoring on this team. It's the defense that's going to be a huge issue.
Agree.
Neither of their centers are good defenders. Neither of their guards are good defenders. Most of their wings are decent defenders at best. Really, Robert Covington's the only solid NBA, all-NBA type of defender on this team. So he's going to be constantly guarding the opponent's best player, and that can be a bit of an issue, especially when you go into the playoffs and you're facing 2 star players. And it's like, all right, we could put Covington on one guy. Who's going to guard, Paul George? Who's going to guard Anthony Davis? Who's going to guard the second star on these great teams that they'll have to face if they go far in the playoffs? So I love this team as a regular season team. I think Lillard's an MVP candidate. And they build on their success in the bubble. They finally have a healthy team that's worked together, have won many games together. They have a lot going for them, and they'll probably be a high seed in the playoffs. But again, the defense is a huge issue for them. They got to step that up if they want any hope of stopping the head honchos in the West.
I agree, and I think that's why the Blazers, they're not a championship level team. I think they're going to be a great regular season team, assuming health. Health is the big concern here. Last year, they were riddled with injuries from top to bottom. Everyone basically outside of Damian Lillard. Remember, that's why they brought in Carmelo Anthony, because they were so injured, and it worked out pretty well for them in that regard. Damian Lillard, I think he'll be in the MVP conversation as well. I don't think he'll win it. He's 1 or 2 years away. But the fact that he's saying, oh, yeah, I think I can build in a half-court shot consistently, that will be a new level of range in the NBA. If he can knock down shots by barely stepping over half court, he's already done it to some extent. He might break the NBA from a shooting standpoint. And I didn't think it can get any more broken after Steph Curry, but clearly Dame Lillard might change that for me. Also, remember, going into the playoffs, they had to fight their way into the playoffs because they were on the outside looking in at the start of the bubble. And then Damian Lillard carried them. There was that game against Brooklyn where if Brooklyn won, the Blazers were out. Damian Lillard brought that team to the playoffs, brought them into a play-in game against the Grizzlies. And by that point, they were just gassed by the time they met the Lakers. So I think now with some rest, with some health back on their side, the Blazers could really be a tough team. Moving on to the team. What?
Wait, I was gonna say one more thing I wanted to add. Even if the defense doesn't get better for the Blazers, the one thing that really could have helped them is if the NBA were to add a 4-point line, because
oh yeah,
boy, is this the one team that's missing that? I mean, of course, Lillard would be the main guy shooting from there, but you could have CJ or Gary Trent or maybe even Melo popping 4-pointers.
Okay, Melo's popping 4-pointers. Something's gone wrong. That is not what they want.
That might be the only thing that gets the Blazers over the hump, though, because I don't see this defense improving much. But if they add a 4-point line, it might be over for the league. So the other teams should just thank their lucky stars there's no 4-point line yet.
Not yet, yeah. Moving on to the team that was the number 8 seed entering the playoffs a year ago, ultimately fell to the Blazers in that play-in game, the Memphis Grizzlies. They had the reigning rookie of the year in Ja Morant. They have a couple young pieces as well, Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson Jr. Didn't make a whole lot of moves. They added Mario Hezonja, and then they didn't really lose anyone to my recollection. Honestly, I'm not high on Memphis. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I think last year was an anomaly. They got lucky by the fact that there were some teams injured, like a Portland, and like a Golden State as well. I think Memphis will take a step back this year and really start to continue that build for the future. Maybe they need another young piece or someone to pair with Ja Morant. Maybe like a Mike Conley to Donovan Mitchell, someone like that for Ja Morant.
Yeah, I also can see the Grizzlies taking a bit of a step back here. And the main reason for that is Jaren Jackson's injury. He suffered in the bubble, torn meniscus. They don't know when he'll be back this season. And when he does come back, they might be far out of the playoff race at that point anyway. So that obviously is a huge loss for them. Arguably their second, maybe even best player, depending on who you're asking. He's one of their
second best. Let's be clear.
Yeah, I would say
Ja Morant is far and away their best player.
I would say Ja Morant, obviously their best player. He's one of my favorite young players as well. Just what he was able to do last year, helping bring this team to the 8th seed before the bubble and everything. Like they were the 8th seed. If had the regular season gone on as planned, they might have kept that spot and gone to the playoffs that year, which would have been great for such a young team like this. But with Jaren Jackson out, more attention is going to be focused solely on Ja Morant, as he is the biggest issue for defenders going into Grizzlies games. But at least for the Grizzlies, with Jaren Jackson being out, they could play Brandon Clark a little more, get him some more minutes, because he looked like another phenomenal rookie for them, given where he was drafted as well outside the lottery. He looked like he was a steal back then, played great last season. Now he might be thrusted into the starting role with Jaren Jackson out, so he could develop his game a bit. It's a young team. It's got promise. Don't see playoffs in their sights this year, especially because Jaren Jackson's out. But if Ja Morant can get even better than he was last year, that'd be huge for them. Brandon Clark can develop a little more, and just some of their young pieces that they have on this team. They've got promise, but this year, unfortunately, did not get off to a great start with the injury. And playoff hopes should not be very high, with all the teams in the West getting even better than last year.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say this. I'm excited for what Memphis is doing. Ja Morant as the focal point of that franchise. I just don't think they're ready to take the step into the playoffs. I think last year, like I said earlier, it was an anomaly. And they kind of got lucky. And it showed in the bubble that they couldn't hold on. They were still too young. Moving on to the team that is probably poised to make the biggest leap in the standings, the Phoenix Suns, a team who entered the bubble. Many thought they shouldn't even be there, myself included. Yep.
We both, I remember that video. We both trashed on the Suns for getting a bid, and they shut us up.
They definitely shut us up, going 8-0 in the regular season, just missing out on a play-in game. Had Portland lost that game to Brooklyn, the Suns, I think, would have done it. They would have been in the play-in game, probably would not have done much in the playoffs. But looking at their roster, I mean, Devin Booker, all-star, and top young player in the – it feels like we keep saying top young player. Can we just say top player at this point? But mind you, the guy is, 25? He was born in 1996. 25, 24, something like that. I don't know. Math is hard. He turns 25 next year. There we go. So, and he's been in the league what feels like forever at this point. DeAndre Ayton is one of the best young centers. And then they added the primo veteran point guard mentor, as we saw last year in Oklahoma City, in Chris Paul. And just that alone, I think that makes this team better. But they also brought in Etuan Moore. They brought in Jay Crowder. some other young pieces as well. They have a really solid team. Yeah, they have the majority of their core back, like I mentioned. So this team in Phoenix, I am very excited for what they can do. Sure, they lost Kelly Oubre. They traded him away. They got rid of Ricky Rubio. But the Suns, get your popcorn ready, Ryan. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, if Chris Paul can
Two
lead the
T.O.
Thunder to the
references.
playoffs, I'm pretty sure he can lead the Suns to the playoffs as well, especially considering that going into this offseason, the main focal point for the Suns had to be getting a better point guard to start in their lineup. They had Ricky Rubio, who's a decent facilitator and defender. He
Played
got
well for Phoenix.
beyond
Let's
an
be real.
upgrade. He did play well with them, but they got beyond an upgrade in that position with Chris Paul, who has even better facilitating than Ricky Rubio. Obviously, one of the better defensive point guards in the league. Just in terms of leadership as well, he's just what this young Suns squad needed, because they've been hitting a lot on their draft picks recently. I mean, long are the days of them drafting guys like Marquise Chris and Dragan Bender in the same draft. I mean,
Oh boy.
those were the rough times in the Suns franchise that had them in the basement for a couple of years. But of course, the Devin Booker pick was huge for them. That was about 5 years ago. But recently, Mikal Bridges has been a solid defensive wing, three-point shooter for them. Cam Johnson, who got a lot of hate from last year's draft, was a more than reliable three-point shooter off the bench, and that'll be the same going into the season. Then they added Jalen Smith in this year's draft, who's a great piece on the bench to back up DeAndre Ayton, has a lot of the same skills as a DeAndre Ayton, so they're not missing a step at center when he goes to the bench. This team is deep, has shooting, has great leadership now in Chris Paul, and Monty Williams as a coach has proven that he has this team gelling together. They improved so much in the bubble. Look for them to improve even more as a team this year. I say they're an easy playoff team, and I'm really excited for the Sun squad, what they're going to look like with the duo of Chris Paul and Devin Booker, with all their young pieces, with their depth, and just how far they can go in a playoff contention in the playoffs. Because I haven't seen the Suns in the playoffs in a while. I mean, I started watching
Been
basketball
almost a
around
decade now.
2013. I don't think I've seen the Suns play in the playoffs since like the Steve Nash days. So having an actual playoff team in Phoenix is huge for them. And obviously that Chris Paul signing or trade was a huge part of that.
Yeah, Suns. I'm looking it up right now. I believe the last time they made the playoffs was 2009, 2010, where they lost in the conference finals to the Lakers. So this team is going to be really exciting. And you mentioned Monty Williams. I'm glad you did, because he's a respected coach. I think, as we saw in the bubble, is a great leader, can lead this team. And I think Chris Paul, unlike some of his former teammates, is not a diva. And I think he'll be a great leader. We saw it with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander last year, and even Dennis Schroeder as well. I think Chris Paul could be that mentor player for a guy like a Devin Booker, for a guy like Mikal Bridges. And I remember last year we were saying, oh yeah, the Thunder, despite having Chris Paul, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do anything, whatever. Now everyone's like, oh, on the Suns hype train because they saw what Chris Paul could do. I hope they don't flop, but I think they are a lock for the playoffs. Moving on, next team in the standings, the San Antonio Spurs, whose playoff streak came to an end after missing last year. I believe it was 22 straight years for the Spurs. Ever since they drafted Tim Duncan, they had made the playoffs. So, I mean, props to them. All good things have to come to an end. Really, they didn't make a whole lot of moves. Didn't add anyone. Didn't lose anyone of any significance. The Spurs are now building for the future. Greg Popovich, maybe this is his last season. Who knows? They got some young pieces. Derek White, DeJounte Murray, Lonnie Walker. They still have DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge as well. Right? Something tells me they won't be on the roster much longer. This is really time for the Spurs to start rebuilding. So if I were a fan of San Antonio, I would buckle up for a few years of rebuilding after all the years of success that they had.
Yeah, I think what the Spurs really have to focus on, they're no longer a playoff team like they were for so long. 20 plus years of making the playoffs, that's unheard of. So for them to finally lose that streak, it hurts for San Antonio fans, but it's a sign of things to come. This is no longer a playoff caliber team. They're very young. They've got a couple of former all-star veterans in DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge, who they should look to trade. Or in terms of DeMar DeRozan, he only has 1 year left, so they might even just let him walk after this season. But really what they need to focus on this year and years going forward is developing their young talent. They have 5 first-round picks since 2016, and they all look like they could be hits for them. I mean, you look at DeJounte Murray, a solid point guard who's getting better and better each year, as a solid defender, very long wingspan. Derek White, who had a great season last year. He just got an extension this offseason. He looks to be a part of their future backcourt as well. Lonnie Walker, who we haven't seen much of yet. He's got a lot of bounce to him. He could look like to be one of the better offensive players on this team. He needs to get more minutes. They just drafted Devin Vassell in the lottery. He's a great shooter as well. He should start getting a lot of minutes on this team as well. And Keldon Johnson, a first-round pick last year as well. Just a lot of players on this team who were first-round picks, who have talent, but now they need playing time. Greg Popovich has been known for not playing young players that much, especially because his team is mainly full of veterans who get him the championships. But now that that's no longer the case, there's only really two guys of that caliber, in DeRozan and Aldridge, and even like a Rudy Gay, who's a solid player on a playoff team. But with the Spurs, they've kind of lost in the mix, and there's no really need for them, except maybe for some veteran leadership in the locker room. They need to instead focus on all the guys I mentioned who they drafted in the first round, develop them, see which ones will last on the Spurs franchise and will be part of their future, and see which ones maybe won't have a place on this team in the coming years. They'll probably be out of the playoff race this year. They'll have a good draft pick to add on to all the ones they already have in years to come. So this is going to be a fully new team than we've seen from the Spurs. They're going to be very young, and with Greg Popovich getting up there in age, he might be out as well, and they might get a new head coach soon, and this will be a whole turnaround for the Spurs. So right now, they're kind of in the midst of transitioning from that championship caliber team into their new the
next era.
The next chapter of the Spurs, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And frankly, I think if there's any team that could have a smooth transition, it's the Spurs. We've seen it for 20 years now. Ever since they drafted Tim Duncan, they were able to transition from the David Robinson era to the Tim Duncan era. Now they're shifting from that era. Sure, I think Kawhi Leonard really threw a wrench in those plans. Had he stayed in San Antonio, I think the streak would have continued and there would have been a much even smoother transition. But I think the Spurs can definitely do it. They just got to find the right pieces to build around. Sacramento Kings are next, a team, I believe, with the longest current drought of the playoffs. I believe it's almost 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. And the Kings, they didn't make a whole lot of moves. Also, they lost Bogdan Bogdanovic, which is a huge loss for them. Obviously, the sign and trade that didn't go through with the Milwaukee Bucks, and they lose him for nothing to Atlanta. By the way, before we get to their additions, do you think that the Kings made a mistake in not signing the offer sheet? Because Bogdan Bogdanovic was a restricted free agent.
Oh, absolutely. I thought he was one of the better players on this team. For him to walk at a young age and for no benefit, getting nothing in return for him, that was a big loss for the Kings and a kind of a mess up on their part. Now, maybe there was mention, I guess he didn't want to play for Milwaukee. That's why he didn't go through. I don't know if he didn't want to play for the Kings as well. Maybe that's why they just
Who does want to play for the Kings?
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, he's a restricted free agent. They could sign the offer sheet, keep him there, and just build a winning culture so he'll want to stay. I mean, you're not going to get people to stay if you just let them go when they don't want to stay. I mean, they just signed De'Aaron Fox to an extension. He's going to be there long term. He's their one real bright spot for the future. Bogdanovic could have been that as well, but it's a smart move for him to go to a team like the Hawks, who's kind of going to be in the playoff race this year, is going to win now mode. Whereas the Kings, they'll look to be in the midst of the playoffs. But with the talent on their team, who knows if they'll get them there. They didn't make many moves in this offseason. They did make a draft pick that I absolutely loved, with Tyrese Halliburton. I thought it was the steal of the draft. I think a backcourt of Fox and Halliburton could be lethal for years to come.
Throwing Buddy Hield as well.
They move him to the 3, they keep him in the starting lineup. They trade him to a contender, which has been in a lot of rumors as well, especially with the Sixers looking for shooters like that. I think they should honestly try to move on from Buddy Hield because he could help a playoff team dramatically, so they could get good return for him. Whereas him on this Kings team is not doing much. Sure, he's a great 3-point shooter. You don't want to see him go, especially because they drafted him. And I forget who it was in their front office, but they were proclaiming he'd be the next step.
Vlade Divac.
Vlade Divac, yeah.
Vlade Divac and their owner, whose name I can't pronounce, so I'm not even trying.
They proclamated that he would be the next Steph Curry, so it'd be kind of awkward to trade him after 4 or 5 years from that statement. But nonetheless, I think it would be a smart move for them. Get Halliburton in that starting lineup because he could be a spot-up shooter that Buddy Hield was, but twice as good playmaker, a better defender, and just work perfectly to complement De'Aaron Fox and his driving first scoring type of mentality in this backcourt. Then you have guys like Harrison Barnes still on the team on a heavy contract. He's kind of a weird fit with the Kings as well. And Marvin Bagley, who's been injured most of his career since being drafted number 2 overall by the Kings, he needs to take a big step this year because they put a lot of draft stock into him, drafting him over the likes of Luka and Trae Young. So he needs to prove that he was worth that top selection. If he can get some of a pick and roll game going with De'Aaron Fox, maybe with Halliburton as well, just look for something with these young guys that they've drafted that could lead to some success for the Kings. Yeah, so there's not high expectations. They were kind of a fringe bubble team last year. They ended up getting into the bubble, didn't do much in it. They were never really close to a playing game. I don't see them improving that much this year. I also don't see them being worse. I just think they're kind of stuck in this, not a playoff team, not a top pick team. They're just kind of in the middle right now. But at least for them, they do have some young talent in De'Aaron Fox, in Marvin Bagley, and in their new draft pick, Halliburton, who I thought was one of the better picks in the draft.
I love the Tyrese Halliburton pick. I think him and Fox will be a great tandem. I think we're past the days of the Kings being the laughing stock of the NBA because they couldn't do anything right, and they'll be constantly in the lottery, like top 5 pick lottery. I do think this team is not a playoff team by any stretch. I do think they still need a lot more, which sucks because they were so close 2 years ago. They were in the bubble last year. They just haven't been able to put it together. And I hate to say it, if it doesn't work soon, I think they got to move on from Hield. They got to move on from Fox, move on from Bagley, and really just tear it all down once again. I know that's not what Kings fans want to hear, but I'm not 100% certain in this core. I hope De'Aaron Fox, because he is one of my favorite young players, given his skill set. I'm glad that he got an extension, but I don't know if he's necessarily the best. He can be the best player on a playoff team. Maybe he proves me wrong. Who knows? Final team that was in the bubble that we have to talk about, and maybe one of the most talked about teams given for one player on their roster, the New Orleans Pelicans and Lonzo Ball. No, I'm just kidding. Zion Williamson obviously missed a lot of time last year due to injury, missed time in the bubble due to injury, and I believe it was a death in the family as well. Apparently, he's come back shredded. I haven't seen much of him in the preseason. I don't think he played at all, to be 100% correct. Maybe he did a little. Came back shredded.
Zion, I'm pretty sure he did, yeah.
But he's came back.
He dropped a 30-point game in the preseason, actually.
That's how much NBA preseason basketball I've watched. We were in the heart of fantasy football season. As I was saying, came back shredded. Hopefully he's healthy. He's going to be a huge piece for them. They got a new coach in Stan Van Gundy, so it'll be interesting to see how that relationship works. And then you have Brandon Ingram, who the Pelicans extended. They brought in Steven Adams to be a bruiser next to Zion. Eric Bledsoe, they traded for him in exchange for Drew Holiday, and then they got a boatload of draft picks as well. The Pelicans got a great haul for Drew Holiday, and then, like I mentioned, they still got Lonzo Ball, and they got Josh Hart. They got JJ Redick, Jackson Hayes. They got a lot of nice young pieces. Are the Pelicans a fringe playoff team this year, in your opinion? Do you think they make the play-in tournament?
Yeah, I think fringe is a key word because I just think there's about like 10 teams that could make the playoffs, which is why I like how they expanded it to give 10 teams the opportunity to make the playoffs.
It worked well.
Pelicans are one of those teams. Sure, they're not a top 5 team because the West is absolutely loaded. But
not a top 8
even
team.
if they were an 8th, 9th, or 10th seed, they still deserve a shot at the playoffs because of how talented they are. Obviously, Zion Williamson kind of got robbed of his rookie season, had a minutes restriction, played inconsistently. Of course, the pandemic in the middle of him getting into playing action hurt as well. So we never got one string of action where we could see Zion and what he has to offer. But as he's come back for this season, he's lost a little of that weight. He's not on a minutes restriction anymore. He's free to run this offense and be the dominant force that he has. And he did play a little bit in the preseason. I'm pretty sure he dropped a 30-point game in the preseason, which could be a sign of things to come. I could see him dropping near 30 almost every night, or at least getting 20 and 10, easy candidate to get a double-double. He's just one of those players who's absolutely dominant. Their front court as well is going to be one of those stronger, more unstoppable front courts in the league, with Steven Adams bashing down low.
An added level of toughness. Steven Adams brings an added level of toughness that this New Orleans Pelicans team didn't have. and I think Zion will really benefit.
Yeah, and it just defensively, it helps so much because now they have an anchor on defense. Zion Williamson still has some to be proven on defense, but given his size and athleticism, he should adapt very easily to NBA defense. Lonzo Ball is one of the better perimeter defenders at the point guard position. Eric Bledsoe, decent defender as well. So defensively, they got a lot better. They're still strong offensively with Brandon Ingram as their lead scorer. Zion Williamson, an unstoppable bucket getter as well. Now they have JJ Redick coming off their bench, the sniper that he is. Josh Hart, talk about 3-and-D type of players. That's exactly what he is as well. And they have younger players as well who are more unproven, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker at point guard depth, Kira Lewis, who they drafted this year. So they have a lot of depth. They have a lot of youth. They got much better defensively. They're still a good offensive team. They didn't have much playing time altogether last year, especially considering Zion and his minutes restriction. So now that they're all together this year, sure, losing Drew Holiday hurts, but now it gives more players, younger players, the opportunity to score and improve. So I like the Pelicans to be a fringe playoff team. I like their team makeup a lot. I like the moves they made this offseason, and they're just continuing to make fans forget about Anthony Davis. I mean, losing a star like him could have been a disaster for a team like the Pelicans, especially given that they won't have the best free agency luck as well, like a team like the Jazz. But the fact that they were able to get so much for Anthony Davis, the draft picks they've made, and the moves they've made at head coach, at free agency, all this type of stuff that they're doing, I'm in favor of a lot of it. And I think the Pelicans could definitely be a playoff team.
Definitely be a playoff team. Maybe not this year, but in 2022, definitely, in my opinion. Zion's 2 preseason games he played. The first one against Miami, 26 points, 11 rebounds, 10 for 11 from the line, 8 of 13 from the field. Second game against Milwaukee, 31 points, 9 rebounds, 7 of 11 from the free throw line, 12 of 22 from the field. I mean, if Zion could do this, look out. Plain and simple.
Sorry, I was just gonna say a lot of people give Lonzo tough business for missing a lot of threes. Eric Bledsoe has gotten some hate for that as well. Doesn't matter because they have Steven Adams and Zion Williamson cleaning up the boards, and I don't see anybody stopping those guys on the offensive side of the ball. So they just have the freedom to just shoot it and let their big guys get the rebounds as well and dominate in the paint because they're just so physically dominating both Williamson and Adams that it's gonna be tough for teams to handle.
Hopefully, Steven Adams remembers how to grab a rebound after Russell Westbrook took so many away from him. Jokes. Moving on to the 2 teams that didn't make the bubble from the Western Conference because they were mathematically eliminated. First, you have the Minnesota Timberwolves. They had the number 1 overall draft pick, taking Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. Ryan is a lot higher on him than I am. To be completely frank, I would say, right? Am I wrong?
I'm not exactly super high on Anthony Edwards.
But you're higher on him than I am.
That's debatable. I mean, I would have been higher on him had he gone to a different team, but I just didn't like his fit with the Timberwolves. I didn't think they should have drafted Lonzo Ball because they have D'Angelo Russell already. That'd be a little bit
LaMelo
redundant.
Ball.
Excuse me, yes, LaMelo Ball because that'd be a little bit redundant. But Anthony Edwards, he's still, if he's focused, he could be one of the better rookies in this draft because a lot of the questions for him had to do with his effort and his focus on the basketball court. Nobody doubts his offensive scoring, his playmaking, his size and athleticism. It's going to be hard to stop him if he puts his head down, drives to the rim, stuff like that. But if he focuses more on defense, focuses more on winning, that's a huge part of him. But also he's just a rookie, so it's kind of hard to focus on all of that just in his first year in the league. They still have Karl-Anthony Towns, who's one of the better big men in the league. And of course, D'Angelo Russell, who I mentioned. But defensively, similar to the Trailblazers, their team defensively is going to struggle a lot. I don't see a lot of defenders on this team who are going to help in that aspect. And also, they just got weird leadership type issues with this team. Yeah. I mean, there's the whole saga with Jimmy Butler and the Timberwolves not getting along. That was in the days when Andrew Wiggins was still on the team, so maybe that had something to do with it. But Cat's still there. D'Lo, there's no question he could help teams win. I mean, look what he did with the Nets. But then you look at Malik Beasley on this team. He's had a very odd offseason. He just got pleaded guilty to a felony the other day. So I don't even know if he'll be playing this year. There's just weird things going on with this team. I'm not super high on their head coach, Ryan Saunders, either. So I don't think this team is going to be a winning team. They have a lot of individual talent. And Anthony Edwards is the first overall pick. Karl-Anthony Towns, first overall pick. D'Angelo Russell, second overall pick. I mean, they have talent for days but I don't see this whole team fitting together and winning a lot of games together. I think there might be some locker room issues potentially. I'm just not very high on the Timberwolves, despite the talent that they obviously have on paper.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to work between D'Angelo Russell, Karl Anthony Towns, and Anthony Edwards. I honestly think Karl Anthony Towns is so overrated, in my opinion. Should never have been an all-star. Is not that good. I just don't think he can lead a team. I don't think he could be the best player. I don't even think he could be the second best player on a team. To be completely frank, I think Minnesota, they have tried to do everything in their power to make.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
That was me.
Okay. I thought it was me. I was going crazy. I don't think Karl Anthony Towns is very good. I think Minnesota's done everything in their power to make him happy, and he just hasn't delivered on his end. A lot of empty stats, and even then, these stats have not translated into wins. I think it's time for them to move on from Karl Anthony Towns, strip it all down, start over, build around Anthony Edwards, and see what happens from there, because Karl Anthony Towns is just not what anyone expected to be, and I'm lost for words, which is rare. No, you've known me for now over 2 years. I'm rarely lost for words.
I think it's kind of good that you are, because I don't know if I'm on board with all this Karl Anthony Towns hate. I mean, I understand the wins have not been there. They've never been actually. They did go to the playoffs once, so that's pretty much just because of Jimmy Butler. And aside from that season, they haven't been near the playoffs really. They've been always towards the top of the lottery, which is why they get guys like Anthony Edwards and guys like Andrew Wiggins, Karl Anthony Towns, because they always stink and they always get the top picks in that sense. So they're not a winning franchise. They haven't been since they got Karl Anthony Towns. But I don't think the team has made the moves to help Karl Anthony Towns. Andrew Wiggins was never the type of guy. I think he didn't pan out in the sense that the Timberwolves would like to
100% agree.
Pan out. The whole Jimmy Butler saga didn't help either. And now they're just getting D'Lo. Like, he's a solid player, but it's not a move that's going to help them make the playoffs, especially in the West, which is just absolutely loaded. Karl Anthony Towns, there is a lot of questions with his defense. That's one of the things, given his size and his athleticism, it's kind of questionable why he's not great on defense. But offensively, he's so hard to guard. Just either down load where he just dominates guys. He gets most of his rebounds on the offensive side of things and gets a lot of putbacks, stuff like that. But also he can space the floor. He's starting to shoot more from three, and he's shooting efficiently as well. He put up, I think, almost 27 points and 10 boards last year. So they are good stats. So you look on paper, like I said, there's a good team on paper. They have talent and stuff like that. But in terms of generating wins, I don't see that happening much. And sure, you definitely could put some blame on Karl Anthony Towns. He's the best player on this team. He should be leading them to more success than they've had in recent years. But as a whole, as a system, looking at coaching staff, looking at the depth on this team, there's just not much there to help Karl Anthony Towns. And I still think talent-wise, he's one of the better bigs in the league, but he hasn't proven that he could be that difference maker that helps turn teams around, which is probably why you're so low on him, because given where he was drafted, given his physical traits, he should be a type of guy who, as soon as he got on this team, they became winners. But it hasn't been that case so far. But I think it's still going to be interesting to watch this young team this season, even if they do come up short of the playoffs again.
Oh, I don't think it's going to be exciting at all, in my personal opinion. Since Karl Anthony Towns was drafted in 2015, prior to the 2015-2016 season, here are the Timberwolves' records. 29-53, fifth in their division. Karl Anthony Towns played all 82 games. 31-51 in 2016-17. Karl Anthony Towns played 82 games, so again, fifth. 2017-2018, the year that Jimmy Butler is on the roster, fourth out of the fifth in their division. They had a 47-35 record. So that just shows you how crazy the West was that year. Jimmy Butler probably had more of a say in that one because Cat played 82 games. 2018-19, 36-46. Karl Anthony Towns played 77 games, fifth out of five in their division. Last year, Cat plays 35 out of 64 games. The Timberwolves go 19-45. So maybe not entirely Cat's fault on that one, but still, I think that just proves my point a little bit more that Karl Anthony Towns does not contribute to wins. And if you're not contributing to wins, why are they paying you so much money? Final team.
Wait. One more thing I just want to add with that.
Go ahead.
It's just, I understand what you're saying. I also just think it has more to say with the Timberwolves than Karl Anthony Towns, because Kevin Love was in the exact same situation where he was putting up double doubles every night. He was an all-star, one of the better bigs in the league. they never made the playoffs with him, even though he was in his peak, which was with the Timberwolves, not with the Cavs. He was one of the top bigs in the league. Just like Karl-Anthony Towns, I don't think he's the top big in the league, but I think he's on a short list of top bigs in the league. But it's just the Timberwolves have been a failure their entire franchise. I mean, they've gone past the first round once in their whole existence as a franchise. So this is not a winning franchise, no matter who you put on this team. So like Kevin Love in years past, like even Kevin Garnett, even though he was able to get the Timberwolves to the playoffs, they never won. So it's just this whole franchise needs I don't know. They just need to learn how to win. And whether you put it all on Karl-Anthony Towns or not is up to you. But just the Timberwolves in general are one of the more losing franchises in the NBA. And I don't know what it's gonna take for them to start changing their losing ways. I don't think this year they're going to change that. I think they'll lose again. We both agree they won't make the playoffs. So their losing ways will continue. They might end up even trading Karl-Anthony Towns because he'll probably want out of there soon. He's sick of losing all these years. I just don't know what it'll take for the Timberwolves to be winning franchise, because there was actually one point where I thought this was one of the better young teams for the future. It was around that Jimmy Butler time where they had Andrew Wiggins, even though before we knew he was kind of a bust at that point. They had Karl-Anthony Towns, and then when they got Jimmy Butler, they had Zach LaVine as well at that point before they made the Butler trade. When they were with that core, it looked like they were going in the right direction. But ever since that move, they just kind of been going in the opposite direction, and nothing's changed for them.
Yeah, I guess we'll see what ultimately they do. Final team, and one of the craziest teams to talk about in this position, last because they were dead last in the NBA last year, the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, no Klay Thompson for the entire year. Draymond Green missed a lot of time. Steph Curry missed a lot of time the first year without Kevin Durant. And the Warriors suffered. They ultimately got the second overall pick, taking James Wiseman. They played last night against the Brooklyn Nets and looked downright horrible. I actually tweeted out, so does this mean that Brooklyn is this good or Golden State is going to be this bad? And let's be clear, Klay, once again, out for the season with an injury. Sucks for him. Hopefully he gets back soon because I love watching him play. Draymond Green, another player who I think is overrated, was out for this game, did not play, and who knows how long he will be out for. Steph Curry, I mean, he's so talented, but I don't know if he could carry this team of young players with Kelly Oubre, James Wiseman, who else? I can't even remember. Eric Paschall.
Wiggins, who we've been talking about.
Yeah, Wiggins too. I totally forgot about Wiggins is on the team. I don't think this team's going to be very good. It's another year of bad things to come for the Warriors, and I think this is actually going to hurt them. The fact that Steph Curry's playing, because he can carry a team to wins alone, in theory. But no, I think the Warriors need one other high draft pick, really, to really set themselves up for the future, but also give a nice young talented piece to pair with Klay, Steph, and Draymond once they all are back 100% healthy.
Yeah, Klay being out really hurts this team because they're not at full potential. The backcourt with Klay Thompson and Steph Curry made it to the finals every single year, whether it was Harrison Barnes at small forward, whether it's Kevin Durant at small forward. It really didn't matter. What the heart and soul of this team was their backcourt and how Curry and Klay complemented each other so nicely and how they were just unstoppable playing together. Without them together, there's not going to be the same Warriors team. I think Curry, who's been touted as one of the best point guards in the league, a top 10 player, he has to show that this team is not going to be a bottom feeder team. I don't think they will once we get to our standings in a bit, but I don't know if he's enough to carry this team. Draymond was out last night, which was a huge reason why they looked so awful on both sides of the floor. Once he's in, that's a lot of their leadership and a lot of just their system runs through Draymond. And I think once he gets back, that'll be big for him. And I liked what I saw out of James Wiseman last night.
I did too.
He was spacing the floor a lot more than I thought. He was dribbling the ball. He was going to the rim aggressively. He shot efficiently from the floor. I mean, there was not a lot of bright spots in their blowout loss to the Nets. But to answer your Twitter question, I think it shows more of how good the Nets are, just based on how Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were unstoppable in the starting lineup. Then you look on their bench, and Karis LeVert is dropping 20 points off the bench, a near triple-double.
Yep.
I mean, their starting lineup is full of scorers, and their bench has scorers like Karis LeVert. They're just so deep and so hard to guard, especially for a Warriors team that doesn't have good bench depth, doesn't have good defenders when you're looking at their starting lineup, especially considering Draymond Green, their best defender, was out. So I think that has to say more about the Nets than it does the Warriors. I think the Warriors will still be a playoff type of team fighting for a playoff spot based on Steph Curry and Draymond Green. They're still there. They are missing Klay Thompson, but those two together is enough to be not a contender in the West, but a playoff type team in the West. If James Wiseman looks as good as he did last night all year, that's huge for them because now their front court is solidified. That could be a huge help for Steph Curry, looking for him for open shots. And Kelly Oubre, he didn't shoot well last night, but I think he's going to be a great piece for this team. Shooter at the wing position, which is just exactly what the Warriors system needs, especially with Kevin Durant going out. You're not going to get the same scoring output at the small forward position, but it doesn't hurt that Kelly Oubre, one of the nicer young wing players in this league, is on their team now. The one spot I really don't like about this Warriors team is the aforementioned Andrew Wiggins, who I think he's underrated in terms of the sense that he is not viewed as one of the biggest busts in recent memory. And I think he's not viewed that way because his start, first of all, he should have been one of the better. He should be a top 30 player in this league just based on his size, what we saw from him early on in his career, going into his rookie of the year campaign as well. I mean, from after that year, if you asked who to build a franchise around, there were people saying Andrew Wiggins at that time. There's so much hype around him. He has so much gifted talent. He's a great scorer. And then he's just continued to fall off year in and year out. Defense has been nowhere near where it should have been. Even though he has a long wingspan, he's fast and athletic, he should be at least a decent defender. He has not been. His shooting has been so inconsistent and bad. Each year, it gets worse and worse each year. And last night, it was awful as well. He was shooting bricks all night from the floor. So him being the shooting guard instead of Klay Thompson is such a downgrade for them that they're not going to realize the potential that they could have had Klay Thompson played again. But I don't think that takes away from the fact that this team is a year removed from almost winning the finals. Sure, and that was without Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant pretty much didn't play that series, and they almost beat the Raptors with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson alone until he got injured. And then once they lost Klay Thompson, their season fell apart, and the identity of the Warriors kind of fell apart because Klay Thompson's so important to them. And with him being out, I don't think there'll be that same threat in the West. But once he gets back on their team next year, I think they're right at the top of the West again, just because from him alone. And if this team can make the playoffs without him, then next year have him come back, and this is a playoff team that gets Klay Thompson, they could be, again, going to the finals again every year because they have that big three again. Sure, they don't have Kevin Durant, but they have guys like Kelly Oubre and James Wiseman now who, if they play well this year, that can be huge for them moving forward. So I don't think they'll be a top team in the West. I also don't think they'll be as bad as they were last year because they do get Curry back and whatnot. So this is, again, like you said, with the Rockets as well, like one of the more uncertain type of teams where it could go one way or another. And it's just based on they have stars who have been stars in the past. One's coming off an injury, the other one's acting like a lunatic right now. But either way, they're both in kind of similar positions to a couple of years ago. They were the top of the West. Things have changed now, where they could still be playoff teams based on the star caliber players they have, but the rest of the team is yet to be seen.
Yeah, and we'll see a lot of the Warriors in terms of what do they have for the future in this season. All right, we're pushing an hour and a half right now, and last time we went nearly 2 hours. I don't want to do that again. It's nearly Christmas Eve, and I got a lot of prep to do. And by prep, I mean just sitting around and avoiding helping at all. Let's move into our standings predictions, Ryan. I'll go first. I have the Lakers at 1, the Trailblazers at 2, the Clippers at 3, Denver at 4, Utah 5, Phoenix 6, Dallas 7, Memphis at 8 as my top 8 seeds. And then the 2 play-in teams as well will be Houston and New Orleans. And then rounding out Sacramento, Golden State, San Antonio, Oklahoma City, and Minnesota with the worst record in the conference.
All right. I like that you're giving the Blazers some love at number 2.
Dame Lillard is going to carry this team. I
can honestly see that. I mean, I have them going into my standings now. I have the Lakers number 1, of course. I have the Nuggets at number 2. I think it could be either the Blazers or the Nuggets, who are a young team who could take that second seed. Because I also have the Clippers at 3. I think Lakers and Clippers will be top 3 teams no matter what their seeding is. And if I'm looking at a team who could be in that top 3 with them, the Blazers come to mind and the Nuggets come to mind. But I had the Nuggets at number 2 just based on how – if Michael Porter Jr. becomes an all-star type of player on this team, then they have a legit big 3.
It's a wrap.
they'll be by far one of the best teams in the West. So I'm really high on the Nuggets. Have them at two, Clippers at 3. I have the Mavericks at 4. I think Luka Doncic is going to
Ooh,
have a crazy year. If Kristaps doesn't come back, though, I could see them falling to a 6 or 7 seed. But Luka alone could bring them into the playoff mix, obviously. And with a healthy
dang.
Porzingis, I see this being a top 5 team easy in the West. Then I have the Blazers at 5. Even though he's my boy, I don't know if he'll be a number 2 seed, but I see them easily being a top 5 seed. I could see them being anything from 1 to 5, honestly. Like, I think the Blazers, the sky is a limit for them. The Suns I have at number 6. I think they're a lock for the playoffs. I don't think they'll get a top tier seeding wise, but I definitely think they're a playoff team nonetheless. The Jazz at number 7, and I have the Warriors actually at 8.
Wow.
I think whether
Even after
from 8
last
to
night.
10, that's the thing. I'm not going off of last night because I think the Nets can make the finals, and the Warriors are a fringe playoff team. So of course they're going to get rocked, especially with Draymond Green out and Steph Curry being literally the only scoring option on the team, and he didn't play well, so that doesn't help as well. Nonetheless, though, as I mentioned, Klay Thompson being out prevents his team from being a top tier team, because when Klay Thompson was in, I thought they were a top 4 team easily. I would have put them where the Mavericks are right now had they had Klay Thompson. But with him out, that knocks them down. But I don't think they're out of the playoffs. Maybe they go to 9th or 10th and they have to play a play-in game. But either way, I think they find themselves in the playoffs, maybe at an 8th seed, something like that. Because I don't know. It's just hard to see the Warriors going from absolute dominant in the league and then just falling completely out of the playoff race in a year and a half. Then I have the Pelicans at 9. I think it's hard to keep them out of the playoffs. I could see them making the 8th seed as well. I think it's really between the Warriors and Pelicans at this point. And then I do have the Rockets at 10 because they could either be an easy playoff team if they keep Harden, or if they get rid of Harden, they might tank and you'd be nowhere near the playoffs, which I could also see. But it's just given how much of a wild card they are, I had to put them at 10, so they have some shot of making the playoffs. Then I have my teams who probably won't make the playoffs or even sift the playoffs. The Kings at 11, the Timberwolves at 12. I don't think they'll be the worst team in the West, but I think 12th seed is not great. It's lost season essentially. The Grizzlies at 13, unless Jaren Jackson comes back soon. Ja Morant's essentially the only primary scorer on this team. So if opponents double team him, they're kind of lost at that point. So I don't see the Grizzlies having a great year. And I have the Spurs and Thunder at the bottom of the West.
Very interesting. So I guess the teams we disagree upon the most is Dallas and Memphis. I had Dallas as a 7 seed. You had them as a 4 seed. I had Memphis as 8. You had them at 13, right?
Yeah.
So
the Warriors we kind of disagree
Warriors
on.
as well. Yes.
They're like a 13.
And I think that's what speaks to how good this Western Conference is. That I could see any of outside of San Antonio, Oklahoma City, and Minnesota, and maybe Sacramento as well. I can see any team making the playoffs and making the play-in tournament and competing. So I think that's what's going to be so exciting about the Western Conference this year, especially. Hopefully, we get a lot of health in terms of the play of these teams. Because like if LeBron James goes down and Luka Doncic goes down, obviously the Lakers and Mavericks are not going to be very good. So it should be really intriguing there. That's pretty much it. Any closing thoughts for you? I would say make a finals projection team, but I honestly think we should save that for another episode, but your call.
Yeah, I think there's definitely about like 10 teams or so that are in the playoff mix, and I think we agree on all those teams, except maybe the Warriors. I think you view them as a non-playoff team. But aside from that, I think, there's just a very good crop of teams in the West, no matter where you rank them. That's why the standings, don't take them too much, like to heart, because the Mavericks could be a 6th seed, a 2nd seed, a 7th seed. They could be whatever. They're an automatic playoff team in both of our opinions. I doubt they miss the playoffs unless Luka goes down. So it's really just injuries factor into it. Just the weirdness that it was this year, the fact that it's literally like a 3-month season. I mean, it's essentially January, February, first week of March, and the last week of December. So 2.5, 3-month season. It's not like nothing we've ever seen. There's no real all-star break. All these weird things are going to be different. Of course, still no fans in any of the arenas, except they're actually playing in their home arenas for once, which is nice. But yeah, there's no certainty at all, except I think there's a framework of about 10 teams or so that could make the playoffs. And that's why the extension is nice, because there are 10 teams who literally could make the playoffs instead of just the usual 8 teams in years past.
In both conferences. So hopefully the NBA is just fun this year. It's good to have basketball back after 71 days. Ryan, this is probably the last we'll speak on the Chips podcast until the new year. So Merry Christmas. I know although you don't celebrate. Happy New Year.
We do actually.
Okay,
we celebrate both.
That's true. Yeah.
We just got finished celebrating Hanukkah. Now we're ready for Christmas. It should be fun.
Yeah. Stay safe. Stay healthy, my friend. Send my best to the fam. You've been listening to the Chips podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. And we'll see you in 2021. Hopefully it's better than 2020. Enjoy the NBA.
Happy New Year.